All right, so chapter 13 talks about individual time series and multiple time series as ways to visualize time and other functions of an independent variable. What does the latter mean? Is that this applies to not just time, but anything that is ordered in even increments. Okay, not necessarily even, but ideally even. All right, so individual time series are just when we have one line. So you have time on the x-axis. It is always on the x-axis because that is just the way that we read these kind of things. And then some other continuous variable on the y-axis. So these are very similar to the scatter plots that we did before. However, you always have one dot per time point. And they're usually connected by a line. So let's give some examples of when you would use a plot like this. So if you are running like a research study or something like that and taking multiple measurements over time, you can do it that way. Note that it does not need to have, like you can have a study that starts on day one. You can even have a pretest, like 2 weeks before the start of your research study, and then you might have one checkpoint at like 2 months after the start, 6 months after the start, 2 years after the start, and you can still use something like this as long as you don't have multiple measurements on the same time point. You can use this for something like stocks or something like that. Other common examples for business, if you have like sales data or something like that, and you have like a daily or monthly or whatever, like total sales for this time increment, that would be a common use for this kind of data. So usually we see these over spans of years like shown, but it could be any sort of time increment. So the idea of this is less about, let me identify exactly how much they made at this particular point. It's really about trends. So when you're making these graphs, you have a few choices in here. So first option there is to have the individual dots. This is especially good for something like a research study where you're a little bit more interested in the specific point. The more you're interested in just trends, the more the dots are less important, which is why you can get away with just excluding the dots altogether. So you're really mostly just looking at that line. And then that fill option is, again, just to emphasize that trend line instead of focusing on the individual dots themselves. When you're interpreting these type of things, and this is where we're kind of getting a little bit away from the textbook itself, is that you're really looking for just like looking at any 2 time points and looking for changes. So if you're looking at an intervention or something that changed at a specific time point, a lot of times what you'll see is where people actually like, they'll actually like draw a vertical line wherever those intervention or key time points are. And so you'll see like what changed at that certain point of time. So for example, if there was a vertical line here, so like there was a trend and then something happened and then something dropped the trend, made it start going down or kind of plateau before going up again, that would be the indication like, oh, something happened at this point. So that's kind of the stuff that you're looking for in these types of things, as well as what you expect something to do versus what is actually happening over time. So if you expect something to go up over time and then it plateaus, like that's really what you're trying to draw people's attention to. So we've seen a few examples where they've added like horizontal or vertical lines to graphs to show this, that, or the other thing. So knowing the business case or business scenario for your data really helps to formulate those like extra little details. Okay, the multiple time series is, as you would expect, adding one more categorical variable to the mix, and so we can have multiple lines going on. So again, we can have this dot version of it. You can see it gets more visually messy when we have multiple lines going on, because you have all the crossing and stuff like that. And so these you will usually see without the little dots added in. So these you want to always make very, 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 very certain that everything is on the same scale. Programs like Tableau won't let you mess that up, but if you're doing other things or doing things manually, you always want to make like triple check that stuff. Yeah, these all start at 0. We learned before that technically these don't have to start at 0, just for the clarity of the graph. So keep in mind scaling. The other thing to keep in mind is just to make sure that all your values are within the parameters. So that makes sense. Yeah, and you don't want to use this kind of fill type effect with multiple groups, just because the overlap would make it really, really hard to read. So you really only have the couple of options that will make it look good, and this is kind of what you want to end up with. The only reason why you might rethink adding in these type of things would be for accessibility, because remember, when we use color by itself to signify some interesting or important thing, that's not great, which is why here we have this little legend, and here they've actually added the different categories to the line itself. So that would be our best practice. So even if you had a black and white rendition of this graph, you'd still know which line belongs to which. Okay, and of course you can use this with things that are not time. So anything that is ordered. These make sense with things that are equal increment ordered. However, we do see these graphs used for other things. For example, an example of an ordered something would be like education level, but that would require a different type of data setup that you're not going to be able to easily access inside of Tableau. So pretty much you want to stick to continuous variables for this. Those of us who are doing more like stats and stuff, obviously you'd recognize this kind of a line graph as something that we often do for like ANOVAs to show our interactions. And again, we'd have to do some extra setup and stuff to be able to do that easily in Tableau. So for the assignment and for the sake of general data viz, let's just keep this to continuous variables. Okay, even though that's just other options. So continuous variable, categorical variable. Okay. All right. So that, let's switch over to Tableau itself.